In the social impact sector, we talk a lot about systems, structural barriers, root causes, power dynamics. And that framing matters. But I've also watched systems-focused thinking become its own kind of trap, this top-down, abstract, sometimes even alienating thought process that can unintentionally distance itself from the very people it aims to serve. Because systems aren't just structures and policies and laws. They're people. And you can't change a system by imposing solutions from above. You have to build it with the people living inside. My guest today calls herself a practical radical. After her father died when she was just 11, it was basketball that saved her. A team became her second family. And for 8 years, she coached high school girls in West Philadelphia, taking a program from 0 wins in her first season to state champions in her last. She believes deeply in what sports can do for young people. But she also noticed something. For some kids, sports is a hobby. For others, it's a lifeline. We celebrate the ones who make it out, the scholarship winners, the champions. But we rarely ask about the far greater number who don't. And we almost never ask why so many young people need a lifeline in the first place. To explore what it actually means to be a practical radical, I wanted to talk with Beulah Osueke. Beulah is the executive director of New Voices for Reproductive Justice and the founder of Pillar, a new initiative transforming youth sports into spaces of wellness, equity, and growth. I'm Eric Ressler, and this is Designing Tomorrow. And now, my conversation with Beulah Osueke. Beulah Osueke, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You have a really interesting background, in my opinion, both with regards to psychology, sports, social justice, reproductive rights. I would love to actually start by digging in there, because in our pre-discussion, you talked about really being interested in this intersection between sports and social justice. How are those things related, in your opinion?
Yeah, I love sports. I've loved sports ever since I could walk and run and saw my older brother on a soccer team, and I wanted to do what he was doing. When my father passed away when I was 11, it was a AAU basketball coach and a new team of sisters that really held me during a period of grief. At the time, I was a kid. I didn't know I was grieving, but like sports and basketball in particular is kind of what came in and saved me. And so I do think a lot of my fondness for sports and basketball and coaches and team come from that. But I also recognize that with sports, there's these desires to accomplish high feats. So getting a scholarship, going to Division I, winning a championship. And I realized that if you don't have the foundation of your needs met, psychological safety, having food, having a warm place to sleep at night, you're not going to be able to get there, or it's going to be extremely hard. And so oftentimes when I think about sports and people like to highlight all the barriers and the resilience that people navigated, I'm asking, why do people have to navigate those barriers? Why do we require resilience of individual people as opposed to making tenacious structures and systems that look out for the good of people? So for me, I was introduced to a world of possibilities through sports, an avenue that saved me, an avenue that introduced me to people that became a second family to me. With social justice, I found out about social justice really as a career path. My parents were immigrants. They didn't teach me about civil rights and all that. I just navigated certain things. But with social justice, I think it helps ask and answer the question why. And we can really look to create more solid foundations so that less kids have to be resilient and that there's more equity at the forefront. So that's really how I see the blend of the two, sports and social justice. I think we live in a society that often exalts people for having to navigate really tough situations, but our society doesn't equally ask why and look to put an end to those strenuous circumstances.
I want to tug on that thread right away because I think it's really fascinating to explore a little bit more deeply. This idea that sports requires resilience, and I think there's some good in that, right? That there's these challenges that you have to overcome. There's these personal transformations that can happen through sports, and not just through sports, but especially through sports. And at the same time, I think there is, especially in America, this meta narrative of kind of pulling yourself up from your bootstraps and like working hard and like grinning and bearing it and like personal success and transformation. And I don't think that that's all like in bad faith at all. But there's also these structural issues that I think kind of run very counter to that narrative in a very real way, where we're not all starting in with an equitable start in life. And I think that is largely where social justice and systems change comes into. It's not an either or, right? Like there should be individual resilience building and transformation and cultures that allow people to have those really transformative, powerful human experiences, but that we also at the same time want to get everyone starting as close to the finish line as possible and as equal as possible in terms of like where we're all starting from.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. There are themes that just show the brilliance of communities. You think about the grassroots effort, that one kid that has all this talent and the neighborhood might pull to get that kid resources to set them up, right? You think about people, these like macho men and these athletes that are crying because they put so much into it. And so I think that sports can really elicit like that human component. You think about like music unifies people, sports unifies people. You can have people on different ends of the political spectrum that are rooting for the same team. And I think what I'm touching upon though is there are some people that get to play sports as a hobby, right? And there's some people that are playing sports as a lifeline. And I think if we continue celebrating the ones that make it out, but don't analyze and assess the higher percentage of people that don't, we don't get to the root of the problem. And what ends up happening is that we individualize that story, whether success or failure. And there's many more kids that don't have access to what they need, don't have the avenues, that are just kind of falling off to the wayside. And it's like, well, you deserved it, right? Because I think along with that meta narrative you were talking about of resilience, of personal overcome, is a narrative too that if you don't have good things, you deserve poorness, right? And that narrative is really driven into kids' heads early on, that are in the midst of survival. And so one of the things about social justice that became the biggest relief to me once I started getting into it is realizing that my misfortunes were not from my own personal failings, right? We have inadequate systems and structures that are not looking out for us all on an equitable lens, but also that kind of keep things in place, right? There's this perpetuation that those that are wealthy and rich deserve it, and it's because they're smarter or whatever, and those that are not deserve it because they're lazy or whatever. And that's a lie that I think is deeply rooted in capitalism, in order to encourage people to stay on that hamster wheel, to keep going and going and going, instead of inquiring, why don't I have my basic needs? And so when it comes to the intersections of sports and social justice, what I most love about it, any and everyone knows what sports is, has either played, has a child that played, had a family member that played. But I think sometimes social justice can be very pie in the sky. What is this person talking about? So I love the marriage of the two, and I love the marriage of anything social justice and something that's practical, because I believe in being a practical radical and showing people what's possible through the lens of what already exists and just improving what already exists.
I love that. So you mentioned that this on-ramp to sports was kind of your first exposure to even the concept of social justice. That led you to becoming an executive director at a social justice organization. Can you just briefly talk about what that transformation was like for you and maybe what led to it?
Yeah, so I did play sports in my adolescence, and I'm now the executive director of a reproductive justice organization. But in between those two very different realities, I actually entered movement work through a faith-based organizing entity called Power. And it stood for Philadelphians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Rebuild. And my participation at Power, I was a communications director. I knew nothing about social justice. I just knew what I lived. I knew what I navigated. That experience was transformative. I got introduced to a God of righteous anger. I got introduced to the principles of faith broadly, Christianity more specifically, that talks about giving your shirt to the naked, feeding the hungry. And never before in my adolescent years had I connected the teachings of Christ to social justice, right? It felt like, this holy essence, this holy being is caring for the people that are like pushed off to the side. But most of the teachings I had received were about prosperity gospel. You follow these rules and you're going to be rich and wealthy. You're going to have all the cars. I never before was introduced to the grounded discipline and commitment of being a person of faith, living in a world of perpetual and insurmountable inequity. And so when I participated in Power and did their communications work, my eyes were so open. I was sitting alongside priests, imams, pastors, atheists that were coming from different fields of faith saying, this is not right. And our faith tells us to do X, Y, and Z. So I really think it helped me release myself from toxic theology and was able to be introduced to people that are passionate and unapologetic about pursuing a better life, not just for themselves, but for what Dr. Martin Luther King calls the beloved community. And so that was my introduction to justice. But at that particular organization, there was some restricted funding, right? That restricted the issues that the organization could focus on. So I have participated in a fellowship that introduced me to the Black radical tradition. And I got kind of radicalized. I was like, this is nice, but we don't talk about queer issues. We don't talk about women's rights. This feels inadequate. It feels insufficient. And so I was lamenting to a friend, you know how it goes when you're unhappy with a job. And she sent me a job description for a communications manager position at New Voices, the organization I'm currently at. And I entered as a comms position, and 4 to 5 promotions later, I'm now the ED. And so I really do think it's critical that my entry point into the reproductive justice realm was actually through faith, because a lot of people act as if being a person of faith and also someone who advocates for the complete bodily autonomy and freedom of all people are at odds with each other. And for me, they actually complement each other.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we've actually done some work with faith-based freedom of choice organizations. And I do believe there is a perception. And I think there's reasons why there is that perception, right? There are certainly certain denominations that are very, against that choice and against bodily choice. And so, but I think like many things, everything gets kind of chopped down into these black and white perceptions. And so if you are of faith, you are by definition against freedom of choice, which is certainly not true. But what I'd actually like to talk about as part of this transition is more about your background in psychology and communications and how that informs your worldview and your philosophy and your leadership style as an executive director, because that is largely my background as well. And we work with a lot of social impact organizations that have executive directors whose background is in research or in science or in policy, and communications feels like this kind of squishy, unscientific, just like weird amalgam of like storytelling and vibes. So how do you think about communications in this work, and how important do you think it is in this work?
Yeah, that's so interesting because, I definitely have been exposed to the people that think that comms and psychology is like soft science and not necessary. And I think that's interesting. We can bookmark that for another day. For me, I love the fact that I started off in psychology. Actually, when I was in my graduate program, I remember toward the end of the program, I was like, I can't do this for a career. I'm going to take people's stuff home with me. It's going to bleed me out. I can't do it. But through a leadership lens, I'm so grateful that I did it, because one of the first misconceptions that I unlearned as a psychology student was I don't have the answers for people. People have the answers. And a skilled psychologist, a skilled communicator, a skilled coach, a skilled person that knows how to facilitate someone else's growth, knows the right questions to ask, knows the observations to make, right? And knows how to shepherd people to their own epiphanies. Given that I used to coach high school, it is not as meaningful or worthwhile if you give answers to someone else, right? Because that's your answer for them. And so that's really what I think about. I think both communications and psychology help you identify circumstances, teach you to be very observant, and you can have your own articulation and conclusion, but it's really your duty, particularly when you're in a leadership position, it's your duty to help pull that out from the person who might not be seeing it for whatever reason. And so I actually think that people that are skilled in psychology and communications have a sense of clarity, not judgment, but clarity and observation that makes maybe the implicit more explicit. So I think that comms, psychology, all the soft, not real stuff, whatever, provides very fertile ground, whereas other backgrounds or disciplines, they're more black or white. It's more, it has to be this way. So it's interesting that you say most other EDs have that background, because I can kind of see it. And maybe we need to push for more EDs with backgrounds in psych and comms.
Well, now you're just preaching to the choir, because I mean, my entire life's work is dedicated to answering the question, what role does design have in social justice? And, I use design with a capital D to think about who I am and what my firm is and how we show up for clients. But it really does encapsulate psychology, behavior change, communications, like all these things that are critical to movement building, are critical to successful organizations. And even in tactical ways like supporting fundraising, yes, of course, but even more than that, like articulating a belief system about what could be, right? And I think that's so much of social justice work, is showing, hey, it comes down really, in my opinion, to this sentence. Right now, the world looks like this, but what if instead it looks like this, right? Like at some level, every org doing social change work needs to have a sentence that goes something like that. What I want to dig into actually next is, I think, a really keen observation that comes obviously from your coaching, but probably also your psychology background, that the solutions exist and they are in the community, right? And to some degree, social justice orgs, their job is to help shepherd and surface and amplify and support and build infrastructure for those ideas. I'd love if you could talk to us about how you do that in your work, especially around reproductive justice, especially in a time right now where there's a lot of barriers around reproductive justice from a policy and a federal level, in America at least.
Yeah, so whenever I talk about reproductive justice, I like to make sure that there's a grounding and a shared understanding. So there's a reproductive ecosystem, right? And within this ecosystem are three primary pillars: repro rights, which looks at legality; repro health, which looks at like the actual health care that people receive and the quality; and then repro justice, that examines access. So something can be legal and it can be the highest quality, but if people cannot access it, if poor people can access it, disabled people, elderly people, then it's not equitable. And I like to make that distinction because I feel like people often conflate all of them together, or don't even know that there's three separate pillars, which is okay. That's the role of like education and bringing people into the fold. So I am the executive director of a reproductive justice organization. Reproductive justice was founded by Black women. It centers Black women and people that are marginalized by their gender, sexuality, social markers, all those things. And so my organization in particular, honestly, the first year of being an ED was a lot of cleanup. That's not surprising to anyone. Anyone that has come after a founder knows there's a lot of cleanup you have to do financially, administratively. I had to do a lot of, I didn't personally, but the organization invested a lot of professional development into my staff capacity, because a lot of my team members come from divested communities. Education isn't great, or family structure is challenging. And so I also want to name that you have to make sure you have a solid foundation or base, because otherwise your initiatives aren't going to make sense, or you as the individual person are going to have to be at the helm of everything, which is not sustainable. The second thing I realized once we got our foundation settled is that this is too pie in this God. I do believe that academics and the academy plays a role in social justice work, but I think that we have too readily adopted language that is not accessible to everyday people or the people that we want to access. I'm not saying dumb it down. I'm saying make it accessible. Anyone who is an expert in any field can use jargon that is not accessible to maybe the smartest person next to them, whatever. So one of the things that we did at New Voices that I'm very proud of is we launched political homes for people, and we call them the People's Portal. As in, wherever they are, you enter the People's Portal, and we're granting you access or enabling access to trainers, speakers, a new way of thinking and being and looking at the world. To your point, this is your current reality. Now, what if, right? And we don't stop at what if. We also provide steps to getting there, incremental steps. So I'm very proud of that work. We have hubs in each of the cities that we operate: Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia, in which people come together on a monthly basis, talk about their current conditions, talk about why they think that is, what's the source, and together arrive at this collective, it's not me, right? It's misogyny. It's not me. It's X, Y, whatever reason. And then from there, we don't just stop at this new awakening or awareness. We then plug people into tangible, concrete, accessible, and ongoing ways to kind of chip away at that injustice. So twofold, you have this individual, personal level, community building. Oh my God, I see how this is true for my life and what's possible for my life. But then you also have this, what's possible with collective action, what's possible with sustained engagement. I'm oftentimes critiquing people that share a post or attend a rally and they're like, I'm done. This is enough MLK for the day. I'm good. It's like the struggles and the hidden, the struggles and the boring and the tedious. But there is huge possibility in between that first awakening and then seeing shifts in structures and systems and realities.
Hey friends, real quick before we continue today's episode. I'm Eric Ressler, founder and creative director at Cosmic. Cosmic is a creative agency purpose-built for nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. For the last 15 years, we've helped leaders like you nail your impact story and sharpen your strategy. But we're not here to just leave you with a fancy slide deck and a pat on the back. We roll up our sleeves and help you bring our ideas to life through campaigns, creative, and digital experiences. Our work together helps you earn trust, connect deeply with your supporters, and grow your fundraising and your impact. If you value the thinking we share here and want it applied to your biggest challenges, let's talk at designedbycosmic.com. All right, back to today's conversation. I do want to talk a little bit about the language element, especially given your background in communications and psychology. This is something that we spend a lot of time with in our clients, is helping them understand that using simple, plain language is not dumbing down their message. And even if you are trying to reach other people who maybe know what that jargon means, it's still, in my opinion, essentially kind of a defense mechanism. It in my opinion, shows a lack of confidence in truth and knowing, because if you really deeply, truly know something, you should be able to say it plainly and in a simple way. And I'm not saying that's easy. It's actually quite hard. And it makes me also think about, if you look at the true experts, the true thought leaders in any particular discipline, they're going to be the first to say, I don't know all of the answers, right? I'm still learning every single day, because that curiosity and that beginner's mindset is what really allows you to achieve that excellence.
Yeah.
And I think that when we think about messaging and language, especially if we're trying to do social justice work, especially if we're trying to be equitable and accessible, then just logically following that truth, it means we need to use language that sounds like human, speaking to humans, right? It can't sound like it's coming from an academic journal. And more, I believe this to be true, even if you are doing very academic work targeted to other industry experts. I think sometimes we lean on our buzzwords as a way of obfuscating the truth, putting things a little bit lower down than they need to be, not just kind of speaking plainly. And it actually is a way of getting around truly getting clear about what you are and what you stand for. And so it's really good to hear you elevate that. And I think your background in psychology and communications is showing here a little.
Yeah, it's so funny, Eric. We're talking about big words, and I heard you just sneak in obfuscate, and I'm like, there you go.
Yeah, see, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself.
No, I'm just, one of my favorite words is proliferate, and anytime I use it, I'm like, someone's gonna be like, what does that mean? I love that word. Anyways, yeah, I'm joking with you, and I'm also proud of myself for knowing what that word means. But I totally agree, and this is why, like, my relation to sports and social justice are inseparable. Because I very much so could see myself using these fancy languages, getting defensive. And people are like, but why? How does that make sense? If I didn't coach, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm learning about this new movement, reproductive justice. I'm like, what the hell? Like, what is this? There's a movement for Black women, by Black women, what? And I'm also coaching young Black girls in West Philadelphia, right? That don't have all the provisions as children that they should have. These are kids telling me, Coach B, I want to go to Division I. Coach B, I want to win this championship, right? And they don't have consistent housing. So what I realized was my formal career in RJ was the theory, and then coaching was the practice. And they were oftentimes in tension with each other. But I think that's why I'm like very here. Like, I'm very optimistic. I think we deserve so much more than what we're getting. But I'm also like, we cannot be too pie in the sky, because we lose the very people that we say that we're advocating for. There is a thought leader named Andre Banks that he has this phrase called cultural intelligence that really resonates with me. He defines cultural intelligence as the ability to read the emotional and material conditions of the city and then craft a campaign that tells the truth people were already living. And so that's what I think you and I are saying the same thing. Like the role of the organizer, the role of the academic, the role of the person who believes in a better reality than what we're currently existing isn't to be pie in the sky and off of the corner with your smart friends throwing around these fancy terms. But as Toni Cade Bambara tells us, our role is to make the movement irresistible. How do you help people realize, right? How do you empathize with people and say, I know how that feels. This sucks. This should not be how it is. You don't just stay there, but say, look what's possible. And you don't just stay there. You walk alongside them every step, regardless of the challenges, regardless of the hopelessness, regardless of the defeatism. That is liberation in practice. It is not doing the same thing that our current government officials do and look down on our people. We have to be very careful to build power with our people. Otherwise, we're going to replicate the very same power structures that we're now critiquing.
Love that. Let's pivot a little bit to your latest initiative called Pillar. Can you tell us just a little bit about like how Pillar came to be and what you're most excited about with that initiative right now?
Yeah, so I am so excited about Pillar. If you're listening to this audibly, just know that I'm smiling super big. So Pillar essentially is a community building model where young athletes, parents, and coaches all collaborate in order to transform youth sports. We envision an even playing field where every young athlete is fully supported, right? So not just on the court or on the field, but in all things that they do. And our mission is to transform youth sports into spaces of wellness, equity, and growth. I am excited about Pillar because essentially I coached high school girls basketball for 8 years. The first season, we did not win a game. We were 0-18. The last season, we were state champions. There a lot happened between that first and 8th season. And that is where I really got grounded in realizing it doesn't matter what I develop on the X's and O's. My kids can have the best swag. We can have gyms that are full of people. If I'm not conscientious of what these kids are navigating when they're out of my view, then I cannot show up and support their holistic development the way that I want to. So essentially, I developed Pillar because I did not get the support that I needed as a coach. A lot of coaches are extremely powerful and influential, and they do not have a support system. They don't have a community of values-aligned people. They don't have access to entities or institutions or individual leaders that can help push their mission forward, that can help fortify their leadership. So that's essentially what Pillar is. We are in development mode, looking to launch next March around March Madness. But essentially, we want to provide support, clarity, guidance to parents and guardians, coaches, and community members that want to play a role in championing young people in their lives. So I have a brilliant innovation director and a brilliant creative director. I have been ideating Pillar for years, and now it feels surreal that we're at a point, we're about to have a seed gathering where we bring in 50 people that we've socialized this idea with and start testing our assumptions. This is what we assume people need. How do we compare that to what people actually want? So from October until March, when we'll be launching, we're going to basically go through a number of rounds so that when we officially launch and introduce it to people, people see themselves in what Pillar offers. I'm envisioning chapters across the nation in which anyone that's part of the sports ecosystem can tap in and get what they need, whether it's material support, whether it's education, whether it's just relationship. So that's essentially what Pillar is.
I love that. I want to go a little bit deeper on that last thread and talk about how you've been building this, because I'm hearing elements of co-creation, elements of idea validation, and I think that makes perfect logical sense based on how the rest of our conversation has gone in terms of like really truly rooting people at the center of this work and not coming in with a solution, but kind of creating the solution with the community. So share a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind, about how that's gone, maybe some assumptions that you had that were tested, some surprises in that process or validations in that process, and kind of how that approach to building infrastructure and building a new organization is a different and unique way of doing it compared to coming in with predefined solutions and kind of pitching it to the community, so to speak.
Eric, you're really good at your questions. I would be glad to share about that. So because I was a coach, one of the assumptions that I made was that coaches are have such great potential if they're supported, right? So literally, I made the assumption that coaches are who need to be invested in. Like coaches are the ones that are there with the kids. I was able to recruit two brilliant team members that are actually currently working pro bono, as am I, and they're both parents, right? So from there, I went from the hyper focus on coaches to, oh, wait, it needs to involve parents and guardians and young people, right? So it was really hard for me to release that idea of focus on coaches. I'm like, coaches are always thrown under the bus. Coaches are always disregarded. But I trusted the process. I trusted these brilliant people that I brought to the forefront. And now you cannot convince me that it's not that at least those three entities, right? With that, I'm also like, coaches need workshops. We need leadership development sessions, right? We're actually now leaning towards developing a wellness-centered playbook, right? That has different modules, how to navigate, race, how to navigate gender, how to navigate like these social justice concepts that if we kind of like deflower them and just have them at face value, kids deal with it all the time. I know so many Black kids that their parents have them at white dominant schools for better resources, but the kids are navigating racism, right? Or like their white counterparts kind of like, you're only here because you're good at basketball. That's so dehumanizing, right? So we have modules for that, but we also have modules for how to create strategic and fruitful partnerships in the institutions and beyond. We also have like literal like budgeting. Like when I was a coach, I had to budget. It was a little bit of money, but I had to budget a little bit of money that we did. So now that's an assumption that we're making that people would appreciate this wellness-centered playbook, right? So we're going to do an empathy map, but also if the data from our empathy mapping tells us people actually just want to be in community, then that's something that we have to release because our real users are telling us what they want. So what I have, you talked about earlier, we were talking about soft sciences versus hard sciences. One of the things that I really am enjoying in this period right now is that we have parameters, we have this structure, we have these aspirations, and we have ideas of what we need to do to get there. But we also have flexibility, right? And you cannot offer something for a community, and you cannot say something is co-created if you're not willing to make shifts once people show up and give you free wisdom to be like, actually. So like, I hope that's like a concrete enough example, but a number of assumptions, but not like assumptions that are set in stone. We're literally saying these are assumptions because we don't know. And we're trusting people to tell us what actually would gain traction for them.
No, this is great. And I think this is exactly the right way of doing this kind of work, because if you come in too vague and you say, hey, what do you all need? Right? It's just there's not enough structure. There's nothing to react to yet.
Right.
So I think coming in with assumptions based on, soft things like life experience, right? Which it sounds like is a lot of what dominated. Hey, I had this experience as a coach. Likely other people and other coaches are having the same experience. But also, research, whatever it is, but coming in with a set of assumptions, a rough plan, but a willingness to truly listen and to be willing to change your beliefs, which is difficult, right? As human beings, like sometimes we have strongly held beliefs or really big ideas that we get excited about when we're creating a new program or a new organization that's like, we see this potential, we think the community needs it. But I think if you're truly going to do co-creation work or community-based work, you have to be willing to listen to what the community tells you. And even if that's not what you want to hear sometimes. And I think that is an art and a science, right? Because if it's completely democratic and you're trying to solve all things for all people, then you end up watering down your focus. And then you get into this very common trap in the nonprofit space and the social impact space of mission drift or mission creep, where we start here and then now all of a sudden we're adding all these auxiliary things on and we don't actually have the resources and the staff and the capacity to do that work well. So now we're trying to do 10 things. We're not doing any of them very well. So
precisely,
it's difficult work.
Yeah. Thank you for everything you offer, because like for instance, you know how it is, Eric, when you're, you have this idea, you're founder, innovator, entrepreneur. So I was talking about this with someone and she was like, well, you don't want to say just parents, some kids don't have parents. Most of my kids do not live in a 2-parent household. I know that, right? But I also know for the stage that we're at, I need to say parents. Because if you start watering it down, guardians, caretaker, what does that mean? And then it gets into how do we define XYZ? I'm saying parent because a non-parent can function as a parent, right? Now, of course, I also do want to say parents and guardians to acknowledge the vastness and the roles that people play, but I'm trying to get shmoney. So I'm saying parent, so it can be clear that I know what we're talking about. We're talking about the young person themselves, the parent or parental figure, and the coach, right? You have like the catch-all of community member, whatever. But to your point, it is so difficult to have specificity and also the appropriate amount of flexibility. And that makes me think about leadership, right? A lot of people think leaders should have all the answers. Leaders should be like, warriors, like strong men, strong people, strong women. No, the most effective leaders are actually servant leaders, right? They're the people that are like, I have this toolkit. I have these abilities. If I'm going to support this person get from point A to point B, I have to figure out what their barriers are, what their potential blind spots are, and what from my toolkit can I pull, but also what from their toolkit might they not be acknowledging and how to get there. So I always feel like people either pay for it on the front end or back end. When you lead through servant leadership, when you're truly collaborative, you pay for it on the front end a lot. There's a lot of ego depth that has to happen. People can kind of like mess with your vision, whatever. But to your point, if you're steadily holding on to your North Star, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. You will eventually get there, but you have to be willing to adjust as signs are coming to you.
Yeah, I think it's a tough balance, honestly, right? And I this is something I struggle with even in running my small organization of, at this point, 8 people. We've been around for 15 years. Our North Star has changed many times, but I think I have, because of my background in design and in my opinion, good design requires empathy and it requires curiosity, among other things, but primarily those two things. If you get those two things really dialed, good design flows more freely from them. And that by definition means there are many ideas that I have around what I want my organization to be and how I want to help and serve people from a communications lens and where the market, so to speak, actually is. And that's been a constant point of tension in terms of, we see a vision for how design fits into social impact. And then there's the reality of where different organizations are coming to us needing help. And part of that is strategy. We serve this niche of social impact organizations. I'll be blunt about it. We are not structured or a good fit to help organizations that are in the startup phase. That's just not our skill set. It's not where we focus. And for a long time, I wanted to offer something to those people because I care about the work and I want to see everyone succeed. But I had to come to a point of clarity around we're actually not serving them by taking them on and not doing our best work and not really being structured for that stage of growth. And so instead, here's a bunch of free resources that can help you get started. Here's a bunch of partners that are more fit for your stage of organization so that we can get much better at the types of clients that we're best fit to serve, right?
Yeah.
And so just like little examples like that, as well as like big ideas that I have sometimes I get so jazzed about that I can see the vision. And then there's the hard work of getting validation and sometimes not getting validation on those ideas of putting them out there, experimenting and saying, you know what, this experiment failed, which is, a negative framing, but a failed experiment is actually one of the best outcomes you can get because that's the fastest path to learning. And so this is the hard work of leadership, of building new solutions and to use a buzzword, innovative ways, right, to really challenge the status quo of like what has been versus what could be. But I think if you approach it from a lens of curiosity and experimentation, it's just way more fun too.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I resonate so much with so much of what you offered. I really want to introduce the word like discipline, right? Like if, many people that want to do good in the world can be accused of having bleeding hearts, right? And when you have a bleeding heart, anyone that needs anything, you want to give them anything they need. And that does not allow you to pour into whatever your vision is, to have a judicious nature about yourself. And that's something I'm learning. Like when I became ED, so many people came to me with so many requests, jobs, money, favors. And I'm not going to lie, it kind of hurt my feelings because I'm like, I'm a human. Like I'm the same friend before I entered this role. And now I feel like people are reducing me to a favor. And I processed this with my therapist and she's like, I could see how it can feel that way. But perhaps people are just being resourceful, right? They don't see it as taking from you. They're like, oh, this person is positioned to help me. And so when I think about like innovation and the ideas that I have, people are not necessarily trying to pull me off track, right? People are like, how do I benefit, from this? Like, how would I want to switch it or shift it in order for it to meet my needs? And so I do think there's a level of discipline and commitment. Like it's easier to say yes than it is to say no. Saying no is really hard. And I appreciate that mind frame switch that you had. Like I don't want to say I love rejection, but I don't hate rejection as much as I used to, because it's like it's data, right? Like I've been rejected from so many things, but it's data, and it also doesn't steal your time because maybe it's not meant to be. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that about the mindset switch.
Yeah, I think the word discipline is a really important word to use. And I think what I've found, and maybe you resonate with this, maybe you don't, is that discipline requires strategic clarity. Because if you don't have strategic clarity, if you don't know deep down, like, what is my identity as an organization and as a person,
Yeah.
then there's this, like, maybe this is for me, maybe this isn't for me. So when you have that strategic clarity, and I will just say, I don't think strategic clarity is something that you have and then you have it the rest of your life. I think it's consistently evolving as the organization grows and evolves. At least that's been my experience personally, and watching clients evolve, sometimes that we've worked with for close to a decade at this point. And so strategic clarity is something that you constantly need to have tested. But when you have it, it makes it so much easier to make quick choices that you know are right, because you have basically guardrails and discipline, to use your word. And when you have that, it feels almost like a superpower, because you're like, I know so clearly what is a fit and what is not a fit.
Yeah.
And I know that saying no is the right choice for me and whoever I'm saying no to. And especially if I can then connect them with someone who's going to be the right yes for them. So I appreciate all of that. I think this is actually a great place to wrap up. But before we do, I'd love to just give you an opening to pitch anything that you'd like to share, anything that you'd like to, where people can follow you online, digitally, in the real world, how people can support you who are inspired by this conversation. This is your plug zone. Go for it.
Thank you. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me on. This has been fun. People can find me on LinkedIn. They just look up my name, Beulah Osueke. I accept any request that comes. So I won't be like, who's the stranger? I'll just accept it. And yeah, I'm really excited about the work that my team and I are doing with Pillar. You can just type in PILR training. Our website will come up. And the last thing I really want to offer is, I can imagine the people that listen to this or read this are innovators, are entrepreneurs, are great individual thinkers. And I really want to encourage people to build a village, right? Build a village of people that are equally bright, people that might have a little bit of different perspective, because I have learned so much from being vulnerable, from leaning onto people and recognizing I can be wrong and I can be shifted. One of my favorite quotes, and I'll wrap up with this. One of my favorite quotes is, what's destined for you is far greater than what you desire. This is why surrender is essential. And the first time I read that, I was like, what a loser take, right? But it's actually like, you could be looking at something that is minute compared to what is possible for you. But what you were looking at was possible with you as an individual versus you submitting yourself to community and the brilliance that comes with that. So I just want to lift that up, that sometimes it can feel like we're losing or going the wrong way, but there's submission and yielding to anything beyond us as individuals that is required for us to take that next leap. And I'll stop there.
Beautiful. I think that's an incredible message, and one that's really important for our time in history right now. Beulah, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you again for having me.
If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. It really helps. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do for your cause and for being part of the movement to move humanity and the planet forward.